Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Vanilla vs Storm Legion dungeon comparison. Now, we're coming fairly close to the end of the Storm Legion expansion. I mean, we're kind of trickling our way into 3.0 now, with the most recent patch 2.5, which introduced underwater questing and that. So, what I'm going to do is, this is sort of a mini-series comparing original Rift and factors in it. So I'm going to do various episodes comparing. This one is on dungeons, the next one will be on raids, chronicles, PvP, all that kind of stuff, and I'm going to be talking about sort of what I liked that they did in Storm Legion and what I didn't like. Now, the first thing on my sort of agenda for this is dungeons, because dungeons are something I'm quite passionate about. I love endgame content. PvE is my kind of thing, you know, I'm the PvE guy. I PvP occasionally, but I'm not that good at it, and I also get trolled on the forums for being really bad at it. So I tend to leave those to the more hardcore PvPers. But, you know, I'm going to be talking about sort of what I thought of dungeons in Storm Legion. So, just to sort of like give you a general idea, there were initially, well, over the course of Vanilla Rift, there were 11 expert dungeons at endgame, in comparison to the 9 we have in Storm Legion now. Now, pretty much every dungeon in Vanilla that I can think of was its own completely unique environment, and it was quite long, each dungeon. It told sort of a fairly nice story, and it had a really nice background. For example, you know, let's just go through a few at the moment. I mean, you had Deep Strike Mines, which had sort of 7 bosses and was really long and epic. You had Darkening Deeps, which sort of went down and was really long. Foul Cascade, which, while it wasn't that big, it was a nice sort of canyon-themed one. Had King's Breach, which was pretty damn cool. Runic Descent, Fall of Lantern Hook, Abyssal Precipe, Charmless Caldera, Caduceus Rise, which is fucking massive. So, you know, you just had loads. Now, I think my main problem was all of these dungeons, they were really good back in the day, and they felt like an adventure. And what Storm Legion did is, it was just, the dungeons were so short. I mean, apart from, I'm going to say this, right, definitively say this is my personal opinion, all of the Storm Legion experts sucked ass, apart from Tower of the Shattered. Now I'm going on to explain why. So, let's take fucking, Golem Foundry, for example. It's basically a room where 5 bosses spawn, and then if we go down and have a look, Exodus of the Storm Queen, that's a recycled Chancellor of Labour's outdoors, where again 4 bosses spawn. Stormbreaker Protocol, that is, the Argent area, basically reskinned into an instance, and everybody hated that because they had the mechs, and that really sucked. Unhallowed Boneforge, a long corridor with several bosses in, which really did suck, and, you know, it's just quick. Archive of Flesh, again, a room. Tower of the Shattered, an adventure. I like that. That was good. It had a good story and good voice acting, and it was a brilliant dungeon. But all of the others, they were so lackluster. I mean, I'm having a look at Imperium Core again, and I may argue that that was alright. It needed a bit more pizzazz to it to make it a bit more awesome, but it was one of the more enjoyable ones. Basically, it wasn't a room. It was its own unique thing. It's just like they got so lazy on instance design. It was just like a room, and we'll fill it with bosses, and when you kill this boss, another boss will spawn with a bit of pointless trash before it, which I don't know where the trash came from, but it randomly appeared from somewhere. So yeah, I just didn't like the way that they did things. I mean, you know, it was just odd, and it felt really, really lazy. I mean, I'm hoping in 3.0, hopefully they've learned a lesson from this, and like, okay guys, we actually have to make proper dungeons and not rooms where we just spawn bosses, or long corridors, and, you know, I hate that. It's, you know, a bit rubbish. And I mean, they added Realm of Twisted Dreams and returned to Deep Strike in recently. I will argue that Realm of Twisted Dreams is actually a real enjoyable instance, although they've already used all the art assets from Realm of the Fae, so it's basically an updated version of that, and that was an awesome dungeon. And Return to Deep Strike, personally, I think it sucks. It's just so short and boring, and it's kind of like Golem Foundry, mixed in with Imperium Core. That's kind of essentially what the dungeon is, so it's not too interesting for me. So in all honesty, I found them really lackluster. They're a lot shorter, but they're a lot less fun. The bosses in general, their health and mechanics, it's nothing. There's nothing terribly hard about them. I mean, I never spent sort of more than 2 or 3 tries on any of the bosses in an expert. There's no sort of certain trick to it. It's all very, very straightforward and easy. I mean, adding to that, there's sort of memorabilia, like fights that are memorable, and I don't like off the top of my head if somebody was like, oh, what's your favorite Storm Legion expert dungeon? I'd actually have to sit down and think about that. Whereas like if somebody went, oh, what's your favorite classic expert boss, and I go, oh, Skarn back in the day, man, has an insane fight where you had to run around and avoid igniting all the bones, and then you had the last boss in AP where you had to avoid the lasers and people being frozen, and then you had Fall of Lan and Hook where you've been chased by a Malforge, and there's so much awesome stuff. But like, it's just in Storm Legion, I'm blank. There's no boss where I'm like, oh yeah, we had fun on that one once. I mean, the only boss that I can vaguely think of that was somewhat enjoyable for myself was probably, I generally don't know. They didn't have much of an impression on me. Manslaughter, before it got nerfed, was quite fun, because he used to, like, grapple somebody in and then set his laser on them and you had to break the bot, but then they're like, no, that's too hard for the players, so they got rid of it. And it's just rubbish, guys. I mean, you've just panned expert dungeons. They're just boring. They are literally mobs that you just have to hit and they fall over and give loot. It's not even funny. It just sucks, guys. So, if anybody from Tryon is reading this or listening, seriously, think about pizzazzing up the experts, tell a story in them. I mean, there's light story in pretty much every dungeon that you go in, which vaguely links into the storylines, but there's nothing being shoved in your face, and that's what kind of people need, you know? We want figures that can go through the instance with us and, you know, build story on these dungeons and not just be like, I mean, what's Unhallowed Boneforge? It's essentially a cave with some necrotic thrown in. I mean, there's a story in there somewhere, but it hasn't been shoved in my face, and as a lazy person who just wants to hit stuff, you know, I need you guys to shove that story in my face. And the same with Golem Foundry. There's somebody knocking about, and he's activating all these golems. I can't for the life of me remember his name, but he's a bad guy. You know, there needs to be more reinforcement on the story, and I want dungeons where I can adventure through a place or a land or a zone and not just be in a cave or a room. So I've kind of repeated my stuff, but that's what I'm basically trying to say. I want more exciting bosses, more interesting mechanics, think about stuff, and make use of the environment instead of just gunning everywhere and putting AoE down and being like, avoid that shit. So, yeah, a general kind of ranty video there, but you guys kind of get my point, I think. Well, actually, you probably don't get my point. Let me know if you get my point in the comments below about sort of, expert dungeons versus Storm Legion dungeons. I'd really like to hear what you guys think about them. What do you think sort of has changed? And because I may not be onto the right things here, but anyways, guys, that's pretty much it for my little expert dungeons versus normal comparison. Well, Storm Legion versus Classic comparison. In the next video, I'm going to be talking something a lot more positive, which is Chronicles. I thought Chronicles are fucking amazing in this expansion compared to the original. So stay tuned for that. And anyways, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to like, subscribe. If you want to join my bandwagon of hating on Storm Legion experts, share this to a friend, just make them aware, you know. And anyways, thank you once again for watching. Have an enjoyable day. I hope you don't get beaten up by a bunch of youths. Take care, ladies and gentlemen.